Welcome to Flash News Now. Here are today's top 12 stories. Thousands protest as Trump, other world leaders set to meet for G7 summit. The Geneva rallies underscore how the G7 summit, often seen as a polite gathering of friendly powers, has become a flashpoint for public dissent over climate inaction, economic inequality, and authoritarian-era policies that some see as a new normal. Trump's presence signals that the U.S. is still pursuing a America First agenda that clashes with the climate-centric, multilateral tone of the group, while other leaders, especially those from Russia, China, and India, are positioned to negotiate a new framework of global governance that may tilt the balance toward a more multipolar world. Al Jazeera reports from Israeli attack site in southern Beirut. Al Jazeera's on-the-ground dispatch from the shattered apartment block in southern Beirut underscores how the Israel-Hezbollah confrontation has spilled from the battlefield into the civilian heart of Lebanon, heightening the risk of a broader regional escalation. The strike, which came just days after Hezbollah's cross-border rocket barrage and Israel's targeted air raids on Lebanese ammunition depots, signals a willingness by the Israeli Defense Forces to apply pressure inside densely populated neighborhoods, a tactic that could provoke retaliatory attacks on Israeli border towns and further inflame sectarian fault lines in a country already destabilized by economic collapse and political paralysis. As AI companies race to go public, who else is along for the ride? The sudden surge of AI-focused IPO filings is more than a market timing exercise. It signals a structural shift in capital allocation that could recalibrate the tech ecosystem's risk premium and talent pipelines. Venture capitalists, flush from recent exits and buoyed by public enthusiasm for generative models, are pressuring founders to monetize before the AI hype cycle wanes, while institutional investors scramble to secure exposure before valuation inflation erodes upside. This dynamic matters now because the timing aligns with a tightening macro environment, rising rates, looming recession risks, and a post-pandemic rebalancing of corporate spend, creating a crucible in which only firms with defensible data moats, clear monetization pathways, or strategic partnerships will survive the inevitable post-IPO correction. Knicks fans set bus alight during celebrations. The blaze on the World Cup shuttle bus underscores a growing trend of fan excess that threatens public safety and the reputations of major sports franchises. In the short term, New York City officials and the NBA will scramble for liability coverage and evidence of negligence, while the Knicks ownership must confront the optics of a celebratory culture that lapses into arson. The incident also forces national sports governing bodies to revisit crowd control protocols, especially for high-stakes games where emotional stakes are high. Looking ahead, expect the NBA to tighten security requirements for fan transport, possibly mandating fireproofing or stricter supervision, and to collaborate with local emergency services on a unified response plan. Analyst says what attacks on Lebanon could mean for potential U.S.-Iran deal. The timing is critical because the U.S. and Iran are already negotiating a high-stakes nuclear deal that hinges on a cascade of diplomatic signals, and any escalation in Lebanon could tip the balance of risk for Washington. Dan Perry argues that a flare-up, whether a Hezbollah strike or an Israeli response, would immediately pressure the U.S. to either harden its posture or accelerate concessions, while simultaneously forcing Iran to weigh the cost of provoking Israel against the benefit of keeping its influence over Hezbollah. For the reader, the next weeks will be a barometer. Monitor any Israeli military operations in Lebanon, the level of Hezbollah's public rhetoric, and the U.S. TechCrunch Mobility. SpaceX rockets pass Tesla. The convergence of SpaceX's launch cadence with Tesla's vehicle rollout is reshaping capital allocation and regulatory attention across two traditionally separate mobility ecosystems, forcing investors and policymakers to reassess where the next high-margin growth will emerge. By demonstrating reusable launch economics that now undercut the cost per kilometer of orbital freight, SpaceX is creating a viable supply chain for satellite-enabled vehicle services, low-latency connectivity, over-the-air updates, and precision navigation that could make autonomous fleets financially attractive before battery density breakthroughs arrive. Netherlands vs. Japan Live, World Cup 2026. Follow our live build-up with full team news coverage ahead of our live text commentary stream. UK intercepts Russian shadow fleet vessel in Channel, Ministry. The interception underscores the strategic value of the English Channel as a choke point for Russian logistics and the Allies' willingness to enforce sanctions in high-traffic maritime corridors. By seizing a shadow fleet tanker, Britain signals that even vessels that masquerade as civilian shipping are off-limits, thereby tightening the net around Russian oil exports that fund the war in Ukraine. This move also tests Russia's maritime security posture. If the nation responds with a diplomatic protest or a counter-interception, it could catalyze a broader contest for control of the Western approaches. Trump vows Mideast deal is on, calls for no more attacks. Trump's public condemnation of the Israeli strikes on Beirut and his claim that a Mideast deal is on is a sharp pivot from his earlier hawkish rhetoric and signals a potential reshaping of U.S. policy in a region that has been simmering with instability since the 2020 Israel-Lebanon border clashes. By framing the attacks as a misstep, he is attempting to position himself as a broker capable of derailing escalation while simultaneously appealing to a domestic base that favors a hardline stance against Iran and its proxies. The move matters because it could pressure the U.S. administration to accelerate diplomatic outreach, especially to Lebanon's political establishment, Hezbollah, and the broader Gulf coalition, while also opening a window for the European Union and Russia to assert influence in the Middle East. Donald Trump turns 80 and celebrates with UFC cage fighting on the White House lawn. The spectacle of an octogenarian former president staging a UFC-style bout on the White House lawn crystallizes a broader drift in American political theater: the erosion of conventional diplomatic symbolism in favor of hyper-mediated, personality-driven spectacle. At a moment when the United States is negotiating a fragile pivot toward a new Asia-Pacific security architecture and confronting deepening partisan fissures over election integrity, the event functions as a calculated signal that the Trump brand remains a cultural lever capable of reshaping public discourse and mobilizing donor networks. Unacceptable. London protesters slam illegal Israeli settlement land sale. Demonstrators denounce event promoting Israeli settlement land and property sales as a violation of international law. UK forces seize suspected Russian oil tanker accused of funding Ukraine war. British armed forces intercepted an oil tanker believed to be part of Russia's sanctioned shadow fleet. That was your Flash News Now bulletin. Subscribe for more.